Hello and welcome to Artificial Intelligence in the Public Sector, AI, and the Congress, the 7th episode for our 3rd season, produced by GovExec TV in partnership with the National Academy of Public Administration and ACT-IAC, the American Council for Technology Industry Advisory Council. I'm your host, George Jackson. Today, let's turn our attention to the branch of government at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. Don Beyer started serving in 2015 as the representative from Virginia's 8th Congressional District. That's in the heart of Northern Virginia, includes Alexandria, Falls Church, Arlington, an area with a great view of the intersection between AI and the public sector. Beyer chairs the House AI Task Force. So how does Congress view AI and think about its potential? Let's find out. Congressman, thank you so much for being here, sir. So give us a bit of a table setter. AI, one of the most powerful technologies of our times. Federal government wants to seize those opportunities. What's the state of the landscape as you see it?
Exciting and promising. The federal government has, given that we employ 2 million people, non-military, there's enormous opportunity for those 2 million people, or some subset of them, to use AI to be much more productive and to deliver a much better experience to the consumer, to the American citizen. I'm really optimistic about it. We're seeing this play out in many different ways.
Give me a sense of the task force as well. I mentioned it at the top. How did that get started? Where is it today?
Well, the task force was appointed early last year, 2024, by Speaker Mike Johnson with partnership with Hakeem Jeffries, who's the Democratic leader. And so it was 12 Democrats and 12 Republicans, interestingly, 12 women and 12 men. It was led bipartisan sense by the Republican Jay Obernolte and the Democrat Ted Lieu. And the two of them did, I think, a really good job of keeping it very bipartisan the whole year. We had many, many hearings, roundtables, lots and lots of different people from across the not just the political spectrum, but across the perspectives on AI, from the doomers who feel that AI could lead to the end of mankind, to the wildly optimistic who think that this is the best thing that's happened since sliced bread. And ultimately, George, we put together a 270-page report with many, many, I think 80-plus recommendations. And it was unanimously approved by the 12 Democrats and the 12 Republicans. Lots of pieces of legislation came out of it, but it was a great running start. It'd be interesting that there was a sense of guilt and inadequacy, too, on the part of Congress, that in all the years we've had social media, 25-ish now, we've done virtually nothing to regulate social media. The only important social media bill passed gave them immunity from lawsuits. So we felt there have been a lot of downsides of social media, too, that we've never addressed. So we wanted to, as best we could, get ahead of it. It's naive to think that Congress is ever going to be ahead of the American people, but we at least wanted to make a good faith effort to get something laid out, a plan made.
A lot of the social media efforts in there are focused on the risks of artificial intelligence, limiting those for government, for the American people. Do you feel like there's enough in there, and maybe you could work in an executive summary of that 250-page report based on the promise of AI? We hear both sides, double-edged sword, AI, great promise, but things like deepfakes, for example, contained in the report, focus on the other side. Do you feel like it hit both?
Yes, I did. It's interesting, too, because we don't generally need to worry a lot about the upside. People are embracing that with great enthusiasm. We see it in the medical breakthroughs almost every day. And the private sector's done a very good job of that. In fact, we think with AI, this is one of those rare cases where the private sector is leading the government sector. You think about most science and technology over the last couple hundred years, government has led. It's been the huge investments that we've made in research through the universities, through the think tanks and the like. Now we're finding that the private sector is actually racing ahead of the universities and the government sector. The one key area that we reflected in the task force report was trying to democratize AI. And to that end, among the most important recommendations we had was called the Create AI Act, wildly bipartisan, came out of the Science Committee unanimously last year. And that's to literally stand up the equivalent of large language models, things like OpenAI and Anthropic, but with curated data sets, smaller, not intended to do everything, but made available to all the small businesses, the people at home that want to do it in their garage, to really make AI, the tools of AI, not just ChatGPT, but the building tools of AI available to every American.
I was reading, and correct me if this is wrong, but at the time the report was issued, task force members declined to endorse or propose any specific legislation, leaving policy decisions and priorities for future sessions. In this case, the 119th Congress. Is that accurate? And if we've moved into 119th, what do you think the chances for the future of legislation based on all of that great work is?
It's sort of half right. We very much endorsed all these pieces of legislation, specifically 14 pieces of legislation that all 24 members of the task force co-sponsored.
Yeah.
I think 6 or 7 of them came out of the Science Committee unanimously. They never got a vote on the House floor for strange but real reasons. And so the hope was that we'd built a base, a foundation that future Congresses could build upon. I very much hope not much has gotten done in the first 4 months of this Congress. We've been worried about continuing resolutions, keeping the government open, and Congressional Review Act, reversing regulations that Biden passed in the last 6 months of his term. So we've done almost nothing beyond that. Getting ready for the big, beautiful bill that Donald Trump talks about. But I'm hoping that as things settle down, that we'll be able to address all those legislative priorities we had. In the meantime, we don't know what's happening with Task Force Part 2. The thing that Mike Johnson appointed was for the last Congress. I know Democrats and Republicans have been encouraging him to do this again, but he hasn't done it yet, and we will see.
My knowledge of the difference, as we were talking about before we went on the air, of caucus versus task force, subcommittees and the committee structure, the rules that go into that, admittedly, are nowhere close to yours, sir. Like, what is a task force and how does it roll up into that structure where a subcommittee or a committee takes that work and then turns it into legislation to put out in front of the full House?
Yeah, the process is, it's pretty standard, I think, across legislatures. So we come out with, let's just say 70 legislative recommendations. And then each one of those, one by one, is turned into a specific piece of legislation. For example, there's the Defiance Act. You mentioned deepfakes. So this is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is the lead sponsor on that. Lots of Democrats and Republicans co-signed, basically creating a cause of action if somebody takes your image and then does evil things with it on the internet through AI. Because right now, you know, if I find some great pictures of you and do all kinds of evil things with them, you're helpless. I mean, you can ask, Meta or whoever to take it off Facebook.
Yeah.
But you can't sue me. So once that's introduced, then it goes to the House parliamentarian who decides which standing committee will have jurisdiction over that. Does it go to the Science Committee? Does it go to Energy and Commerce? Does it go to the Judiciary Committee? And so all those 70 pieces of legislation could end up being parceled out to 4 or 5 different committees based on their specific area of concern. I mentioned earlier that we had 6 or 7 bills sent to the Science Committee that were all reported out by the Science Committee unanimously, which is great. And then the next step would be they go to the House floor. If it passes the House, off to the Senate, and then hopefully to the president's desk. Maybe because it's early, none of the AI bills introduced last year, they've been all reintroduced now, have been taken up by the committees yet. But hopefully in the next couple of months, we'll get a bunch of them reported out.
For our audience's benefit, we've talked about deepfakes, but these also cover civil rights protections, other areas that are really critically important. If you look at those 14 pieces of legislation, those 70 or 80 plus recommendations, does a clear priority stand out? What should the 119th really take on next there?
George, that's a very difficult balancing question. Because the reality is, as government, our job is to protect our citizens. And so most of the focus has not been on how do we grow AI faster, how do we apply it to more, but rather, how do we protect against the downsides? A lot of our work was built on the NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, AI framework, which was developed a couple of years ago by 2 or 3 people. And it's grown over the years and has become the gold standard for how you can use AI responsibly, how you can use it so that it minimizes the risks to human beings and to society. So what we really have done, if you look at the pieces of legislation one by one, is trying to anticipate the downside and then develop legislation that will address that. Rather than saying, here's a lot more money to grow AI. One of the things the Biden executive order, which is the biggest executive order in history, did was create a safety institute at NIST, specifically to look at the downsides and how to deal with it. Donald Trump reversed that executive order, but then did his own with many of the same things in place. I think the Safety Institute still lives, although my Republican friends, at least at the White House level, rebel against the safety notion and instead want to talk about reliability and responsibility, which is fine, as long as it does the same thing.
Yeah.
So it'll be renamed out at NIST, and again, to protect against the downsides.
What do you anticipate the role of NIST will be going forward? I mean, you've mentioned the importance, that new institute, but what do you think is going to happen?
I'm very optimistic that the new administration will keep it. One of the pieces of legislation we had was to literally take the executive order creation of the Safety Institute and put it in legislation so that it's in the law and doesn't change from president to president. And so, most Americans, interestingly, while excited about AI, are also worried about it for many different reasons. The biggest one is the job elimination. But also, we just don't know what else it can do. We know there's an explosion of child pornography driven by AI because of all the new tools, because you can tell it to do this with a bunch of child images, and then you have a so-called victimless crime, but still very dangerous to have that kind of child pornography out there, what it does to people's heads and psyches and psychologies. So the hope is that with the NIST Institute, that they will be continuing to bulk up and more deeply thought through national and international standards for the responsible use of AI. George, one of the bills that we had said if the federal government's going to use AI, it needs to obey the NIST framework. And if it contracts out with the private sector, with Northrop Grumman or, BAE or whatever else, those also need to use the NIST structure for the AI that's relevant to the government work.
As I mentioned at the top of the program, Congressman, 8th District is right at the intersection of what we're talking about. Great deal of government employees right here in Northern Virginia. A lot of those contractors have either offices or headquarters in Northern Virginia. In addition, you have some really forward-leaning schools in Northern Virginia that have a huge technological or, in many cases, artificial intelligence specific focus. So I want to shift our conversation a little bit to workforce and education, 2 critically important issues. We've covered it throughout all 3 seasons of this series. What do you want to see relative to workforce and education, either in the 119th or out of the White House, sir?
Boy, all the above, George. It's interesting. I feel so privileged, so spoiled to represent Northern Virginia. On the one hand, I have more federal employees than any congressional district in the country. And with Jerry Connolly and the Dix District over, we're pushing 200,000 federal employees. Something like 20% are in the DMV area. But then also, I have the most educated congressional district in the country. Amazon HQ2 came to Northern Virginia, to Arlington, not because we offered them a lot of money, which we didn't. But what we did offer them was the greatest concentration of math, computer science, hard physical science majors and graduates than any comparable area in the country, more than Silicon Valley or Cambridge, Massachusetts, or the Research Triangle. It's just very high IQ and very educated. I'm an undergraduate computer science student at George Mason, for example. The classes are packed. When I took Python 2 years ago, there were 840 students took that one course. CS, I forget what it was, 112, I think. They had to break it into 7 different sections. And now Virginia Tech, we just got the ribbon on its brand new campus right there on the river by the airport. It's a great place. But that also means that that we're going to be on the cutting edge of the use of artificial intelligence in federal government. And so that gets back to the question about what does it do to workforce? Well, if you go with Mark Andreessen's technology manifesto, which is the most optimistic thing you can find, he will point out that every breakthrough in technology in the history of humankind has led to more jobs rather than fewer. But it's not always the same people. I think Northern Virginia is going to be fine because the education level, the IQ level is so high. But it could be dramatic for a lot of other places.
As a follow-up, and I want to maybe preface this, Congressman, with a couple of caveats. First, I'm not asking a political question here, more on the policy and practice, the business of government. I'm also not casting aspersions on anyone or their level of honesty, but for years, I've been navigating these artificial intelligence-oriented discussions, and a common refrain I've heard from both government and industry is that artificial intelligence is not going to replace jobs. It's simply going to act as a value add, let people do higher level work as a result, rather than replace jobs entirely. We've seen a pretty rapid change in the beginning of 2025, reductions in force at a lot of federal agencies. The Department of Government Efficiency has been incredibly active in the first few months of the year. Do you watch some of those changes that the Trump administration is ushering in and think maybe the fact that artificial intelligence is coming in such a big way, it could replace jobs?
It could, George. Although I think the job loss in these first couple of months of the Trump administration, Elon Musk and Doge, has not been about modernization. It would be encouraging if it were about modernization. Instead, it's about DEI. And they are just eliminating office after office after office that deals with civil rights, that deals with changing the character of the workforce, that anything that mentions women or people of color is gone. That's not modernization. That's not the use of AI. That's trying to get back to, getting rid of so-called white prejudice. And so you've had, I've just looked at Marco Rubio's new plan this week on changing State Department. He's just eliminating lots and lots of offices. That's not about AI. They're not transforming it. They're just eliminating the function. AI would be, and by the way, I think even most federal employees would welcome having better technology tools. I visited the Social Security offices last week, and something I do regularly because they're so important to us. And we know they're still using COBOL for all their systems. And there are few people alive who still know how to use COBOL. As they retire or die, we're in trouble. So we're long overdue from coming into system after system and saying, how do you do this with the very best technology today? Will that eliminate some jobs? Yes, but it could theoretically create some more jobs too. Because when you make something more efficient, then you free them up to do tasks that require intelligence and ingenuity, innovation, and the like. I was paying taxes the last week, the April 15th deadline. And it was so nice to be able to go dial right into the computer and go right and pay the thing online with the ABA numbers in the bank account and never have to write a check, go to the post office, go to the IRS office, get the confirmations. That was a big step forward in technology, and there'll be many, many more to come.
You mentioned earlier, it's a thread I wanted to pull on the master's degree work you're undertaking right now. Give us a sense of what's involved in that and why you sort of felt the impetus to do so in the first place.
Mostly, George, because I was so fascinated by artificial intelligence, but I understood it the way an average citizen does. And I wanted to go deeper. And with a number of things in mind that, for example, the biggest driver for me was I've led the suicide prevention task force always with a Republican co-chair for the last 10 years. And we lose 50,000 people a year to death by their own hand. In many cases, a surprise. They weren't in and out of the hospital for depression. What can we do to predict who's at risk so we can intervene early on? A perfect use for AI. And by the way, the Veterans Affairs Administration has a whole AI section right now on veteran suicide. So I figured I'll start at the bottom and try to learn my way of them. I'm just finishing my 8th course, but probably 10 more courses to go.
How are your grades?
That's nice. No one ever asks. I work really hard. My almost a 4.0.
I mean, I read that you were a salutatorian in high school, so good grades are kind of in your DNA at this point.
Well, it's mostly nothing's at stake, so it's more a matter of pride. I do have to confess, I'm sitting around all these wonderful young men and women who seem to get it a lot faster than I do. I sort of long for the days when I was 18 years old and the math whiz, because I'm not that anymore.
Do you have any concerns relative to your fellow congressional leaders and their knowledge of artificial intelligence or maybe these really, emerging technology fields? Like you've gone back to get a master's degree relative to that. How does that compare with your fellow elected representatives?
Yeah, I think it's okay. That's a little unusual, but all throughout Congress, there are people that have their specialty areas. For example, I'm on Ways and Means. There are roughly 40 of us. And most of the 40 understand what's in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, have an opinion about tariffs and a more sophisticated understanding about it. We understand, what the debate's going to be over the corporate tax rate or doubling the personal deductions. But we don't expect the other 390 to be as up on that as we do. Same with our guys on the Defense Committee. They understand how many ships we need way better than I do. So the fact that there's a subset of probably 30 of us that dive deep on AI, I think the rest of the Congress can build upon. And it's naive to think that all 435 are going to understand it.
Congressman, I know you have an important meeting to get to, so I want to close out with almost some final words, a call to action, galvanize the audience. What do we need most around artificial intelligence?
I think, number one, people need to use it. You need to go onto the 4 big language models and just see how powerful it is. I had an experience this morning where a wonderful woman showed me how artificial intelligence created a human image of what her dog would look like if it were human. Maybe not useful today, but fascinating. And just understand how powerful the technology is. But then we also need to be brave enough to realize that there will be regulation involved. That's the tension in Congress right now is my Republican friends, led by the Steve Scalise, say no regulation. And that's sort of the Musk perspective too. And yet even the ones in the big, the Sam Altmans and the Jack Clarks and the Eric Schmidts all say we do need some regulation. There needs to be a balance.
Congressman Don Beyer, Chair, House AI Task Force. Sir, great to see you.
Thank you, George, very much.
And thank you, our audience, for tuning in. I hope you're as excited as I am to continue exploring AI in the public sector. For GovExec TV here at our Watergate studios in Washington, D.C., I'm George Jackson. Have a great day.